Okay, sweet. So this is the Bushido Podcast, episode 8, and I'm with Haley, who is one of my best friends from childhood. We actually went to preschool together and kindergarten and went through elementary, middle, and high school all together. So we've been friends a really long time and have been, on and off in contact as people do, normally as is life. And so it's really my pleasure to have you on, Haley. If you just want to go ahead and give people a background to tell a little bit of your story, and then we can get right into it.
Party on. That sounds great. Hello, hello. I am Haley Thomas. Technically speaking, the role I play, right, other than the natural human being, is a licensed mental health counselor. And I just actually started my own corporation called Solely Loved Therapy and Coaching. So I'm pretty passionate about just figuring out how to do life, right? Kind of humans 101 in that sense. And like Levi said, I am blessed to have a friendship that has lasted this long, to be able to come on here and just not only be a fan, but now actually be an honor to be a part of your show is super cool. And today I'm just kind of hoping to come into this with some really awesome conversations and just sort of see where this moment takes us, right? Being what being present with each other is. So thank you very much for having me, Levi.
Yeah, for sure. Honor is really all mine. So first of all, what's your undergrad in?
So my undergrad is technically in psychology, and I had graduated from East Stroudsburg University up in Pennsylvania for that degree. And then I went to get my master's in a graduate program at Florida International University, and that was in professional counseling psychology.
Okay. So kind of touching on what we were just talking about before. You said your master's was in what?
Professional counseling psychology.
Professional counseling psychology or therapy?
Yep. So, psychology technically, but the role is a psychotherapist is essentially what my title is, or like a licensed mental health counselor. That's honestly one of the most confusing parts is like, what's a psychiatrist versus psychologist versus therapist?
And psychotherapist.
Challenging. And a psychotherapist, yep,
yeah.
Which is essentially the same as a therapist in that way.
Okay. But get psycho in there, really just, keep people on their toes.
It just sounds cooler,
I would consider myself a psycho entrepreneur. Just throw that in there, keep people on their toes,
They're like, what does that actually mean?
I was talking to my friend the other day about that. I'm like, what's the difference between a model and a supermodel? Can I be like a super entrepreneur? Like, what's the distinguisher here?
Super therapist. I'm gonna adopt that one. That's good.
What I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What was I just gonna say though? As you had just mentioned about me starting my podcast and not really having like a plan perfectly worked out for saying, oh, it's going to be about this. And you said that's actually like something that you would encourage people to do is kind of just jumping in the deep end, as we say, or just going for it. How about you in your case for being a therapist? Is this something that when you went initially for your undergrad in psychology, did you already have an idea like, oh, I think I would like to be a therapist one day, or you were just kind of seeing how things played out?
That's such a great question, and it's taken me the last couple of years to like really reflect on this. And honestly, I think I've figured it out sometimes in session as I'm hearing other stories and whatnot. But I will say I vividly remember I was probably in like 6th grade. And I remember saying to myself, like, when I have my own therapy office, I'm going to make people sign a waiver that says they're ready to change. And I vividly remember having that conversation in my mind. And what's wild then is you go to grad school and like motivation not to change, right, is like something that you get taught, right? When someone walks in your office and they aren't motivated to change, right? Like, what does that look like? And how do we actually like process that through the therapeutic space, right? So I learned a little bit of a reality check, if you will, in that way. But to answer your question in that sense, Levi, is like, I think innately, without having a complete plan, there was just something in my heart that said, I want to have conversations with people about life. And to me, that is the definition of what my therapeutic space, anyway, what I'm trying to make it represent. Because I don't believe that, I'll put it this way. It's like, I think our field gets very convoluted with this like understanding that it has to be like scientifically based, and don't get me wrong, like evidence-based treatments as what we are taught through graduate school especially, it makes sense, right? It's put on research, it's peer reviewed, not just articles, but like the actual scientific experiments that are teaching us what are the tools that help people overcome things like depression, anxiety, personality disorders sometimes, ADHD, right? A whole slew of like mental disorders. But there is a part of me, the more I get into this experience and learn more, both through school and now in the field, that just grounds me in nobody having a roadmap on how to do life. And to come into a therapy office, like feeling like your therapist is somehow going to give you like advice on your life, to me it almost makes me feel like I have too much power, right? I am not the guide of your life, right? To any individual. I'm a genuine believer that like you have everything you need to go have a fulfilling, meaningful, and purposeful life already within you. But we get so clouded, I think, and almost like contaminated, right, with scripts and bad thoughts or traumatic experiences, or like things that negative experiences or negative thought processes that are given to us by other people from their own wounds, right, in life, that tarnish our ability to want to go and like discover who we are in ourself. So bringing this back to your original question here is like, when you were telling me about how, you just kind of went for it in this sense, right? You knew this was something you wanted to do. It was something that was like climbing in a sense of anticipation, but you didn't have to have this full plan. I think that's a beautiful representation of how we can do life as humans, is like a little bit of courage to just explore yourself leads you to discovery, right? But I think we have this fallacy, mostly by maybe society or just like, belief systems, limiting belief systems that are happening for all of us, that tell us we have to logically have a plan figured out, and have a step-by-step or something very systematic to make sure and have certainty that it's going to work, right? That we're going to be successful at it. And I tend to think that's actually a disservice to ourselves to make sure that everything is going to be put out that way. It's as if we have more control. It's an illusion of control in that space that I don't think we actually have. So to me, it's about going about what you think is right in your heart, following it through, and seeing where that takes you. And I think ultimately that is like pretty much what led me to my role right now. I could not have predicted this even in 6th grade. I knew I wanted an office. I knew I wanted to talk to people, but I couldn't predict exactly what this would look like right now.
Wow, that's really well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. What was I going to? Oh, so this is actually, it's funny, this is actually a metaphor, kind of thinking on things like these ideas or concept that we've had in our head for a long time. And it's like, and when you're talking about this, I kind of think of it as like science versus art, and not in terms of like literal science versus literal art, but like the way we go about life,
Yes.
or in anything really. So let's say in jujitsu, for example, I always do jujitsu examples. It's like jujitsu to a certain level, it's like a science, there's the mechanics of it. You move your body this way, you move your arms or legs this way, and this is the result. Like that's the science of it. But there's a
Yes.
whole art of it behind it. Like you, in this moment, you can do this or you can do this. There's no right or wrong answer, but like there's a way to go about doing those things. But the choice of which one to take, that's part of the art, and where like everyone has their own style in
Yes.
jiu-jitsu, like depending on their body type, their personality, their flexibility, like, and all those will be expressed. And I think as we're talking, like your plan, this is like in jiu-jitsu, you don't come in thinking like, oh, I'm going to be like this type of fighter. I mean, maybe in very extreme cases, and you have a coach who's like, okay, maybe they can see that in you. But for the
Sure.
most part, you really just have to go in and you go and you practice, and that's how you discover your style, like
Yes.
only by like repetition. And I think therapy, I would say, is probably the same way. And then also extending that analogy even further is like, that's even like life. And just like you're saying, like, I can't tell you, or you as a therapist, you can't tell someone how to live their life because you're not them and you don't know what is going to work for them.
Right.
It's like the doctor. It's like they might prescribe something to 99 out of 100 people that works great, but you might be that 1 out of 100. So at the end of the day, it's up to you to be that like N of one. Like you are the sample size, you are the population of your life. It's up to you to be, you know, whether that's experimenting with like your diet, that's could be an
Yep.
example, or your
Yep.
hobbies.
Yes.
That's another example. Like you need to be taking control of your life because you're the only one, and you know, you have all the insight. Like you said, you have all the tools. Only you know all the experience that you've had. And that's where it comes to the art. Of course, there's the science of like, yeah, you should eat well and train and like brush your teeth. And these are all the things of like, yeah, that's the science of how to live. And that's more of like the, if we were asked to say what does success look like, those are probably all like the answers of like being healthy and mentally sound. Those are all the things that we would come. But then the art of life is like, well, success for me is having a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And that's the art of it, because for a lot of other people, that wouldn't be the case. And for you, the art
Yes.
of your life is, you know, I want to be a successful therapist and help people work through their issues. And that's your art that you're finding. So I
Yeah.
think it's like these two things of like, yes, implement these research-based tools that we have, you know, implement the things that are proven to be good for you, but
Yes.
also leave room for the art and for that breathing space. And to bring back to the analogy of how I got on this initially is like, you don't want to be so focused on climbing the hill or the mountain that you're climbing that you get to the top, but then you look over and you realize like, oh shit, you know, like I was so focused on climbing this mountain that I didn't even take a second to look up and realize I want to be over on the mountain over there.
Yeah.
So that is, I don't know if the science versus art analogy I'm making is capturing that idea perfectly, but it's like you need to be focused and disciplined, yes, but you also need to be like, have some antennas out for the big picture and make sure that you're actually climbing the right mountain.
Yes. Yes. Dude, I feel like excitement rising because you are like tapping into a thought process that I sit on literally almost all of the day in a lot of ways. And that's this concept of like utilizing our rational and our logical mind, right? And I don't mean it in we hear it and it's presented as like left brain, right brain, you know, math and artsiness, right? But I think it's much deeper than that in like, are we a rational thinker, right? Do we often get taught, or sometimes it is like literally from, let's say, like if, let's say dad, right, is like a really logical minded person, very systematic. He's been a businessman, right? He's probably not had as much experience in the field or like the realm of like emotional intelligence sometimes, right? And I think when we can combine both of these fields of thinking, right? One being a very logical, rational approach to things that has a scientific basis, absolutely, right? And it's there for a reason, right? Facts are facts are facts. So there is some level of acknowledging we cannot ignore data and science and logic in a lot of ways, right? But just like you're saying, we are also, and this is the part that I'm starting to like grow more into and like want to be much more curious about, is this part of ourself that, as you described it as art, I kind of think of it as like either a spiritual, emotional, or a what's a good word for it? I mean, I think that really is, it encompasses a spiritual and emotional side of
Intangible.
ourselves.
We can call it like tangible versus intangible.
Well said. Yes. And it's, to me, it is about like discovering this unique and personalized like flow of putting both of these parallel parts of the human experience together, right? And like, what a powerhouse that can happen in your human experience when you're able to work from both sides of these fields of thinking, right? But I'll give the example of like, and I've ironically kind of observed this in my sessions quite a bit, is like there is a limitation to being able to express or open up right from a vulnerable space and learn about yourself when we've been so geared to think of logic, right? To think of like, for instance, I'll use the example that comes up a lot. We'll use like anxiety about like, what do people think of me? right? Social anxiety, if you will. It's the fear that people are judging you, right? And this is a fear that in nature sounds rational because everybody experiences it to some degree, right? But some people are genuinely debilitated by it, right? So there is facts and logic in how to treat this, which either comes from an approach of wanting to expose you very gradually to put you in situations in which you start to realize like people are not actually judging me out here, you know, when I'm doing X, Y, or Z task, or, you know, I'm putting myself in more social situations and realizing that the fear on high alert system doesn't have to be that high alert. It's like I'm safer than I think I am. But there's also the approach of like trying to change the way that you believe, right? Trying to shift your thought system, your belief system, so that before you even go into that setting, you have an innate belief system that says, I'm probably safe in this, and maybe a few people will judge me, but not everybody will, right? That thought process is ultimately bringing two fields of thinking. The fact that people will judge you, right? We're never going to avoid that 100% in life, right? So to think that the solution to that is, well, then I just have to be somebody who isn't judgeable, that's not very rational, right? But if we can bring in the emotional mind that allows us to say, yes, people will judge me factually, but I also know that I have something to offer the world that's an opinion. That's not a fact, right? But it's coming from a nature of saying like we all have something to offer. There are good things in all of us that people can notice or see, right? That's not a factual understanding, but we also may add in, this is where I'll go into like spirituality for a moment, is also like, but I hope that someone is going to see that for me, right? And I think that's where when we can put those two sort of like lens together, that's where you start to feel that flow or like working through both of those things. And actually I wanted to mention this too, Levi, just from a outside of the therapeutic sort of realm in this is like growing up, I mean, we both were playing a lot of sports, right? And having very like athletic backgrounds. And that's something that I think came very like natural to both of us in that sense, right? Like, yes, there's technique and you need to work on it, right? Just like how you said in jujitsu, there are certain techniques that you're going to need to learn from a scientific basis that work, right? That we've found, discover, and they are effective. But there is this like style that you bring to it and something that is flow that is unique to you and your person alone, right? And I when you were saying that, it made me think of wakeboarding has sort of become one of my hobbies, being on the lake. I live in the middle of absolute nowhere. But the beauty of it is that there's a lot of opportunity for like small farmette activities, right? Wakeboarding has become one of them. And logically speaking, I knew nothing about that, right? I'm watching YouTube videos to like teach me certain technique, right? I'm watching YouTube videos about how to sand a tree stump, right? Like, do I need to learn different grits on sanding a tree stump to make tree furniture? And the cool part is then, right, when you just allow yourself to try without judgment, I think that's where we get into, we're not being critical about we're following these steps perfectly. It's, I'm going to try my best to follow the steps, use what techniques I have been taught, but I'm also going to allow space to just kind of like feel through this and like enjoy what this very grateful moment is that I'm even having the opportunity to try this new thing. That's where I think we tap into this other artsier, softer skill side that makes for an optimized experience, if you will.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think, I mean, more jujitsu examples, of course, but like going
Please do
into
enlighten me.
jujitsu, there's different mentality to win, and it's actually pretty cool thus far in my MBA. We learned it's basically the same concept. In the MBA, it's called like organizing to execute versus organizing to learn. And basically what I would say in comparing jujitsu is like going into win versus going into learn. And
Yes.
if you go in, and I'll just speak from my experience, like if I'm just going in there to like try to like get aggressive and win, and like I'm not going to tap, I don't learn as much as whenever I just go in and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go in and I'm going to have some fun and I'm going to try to learn and I'm going to try to do these new moves we're learning. Maybe I'll get tapped out, or that's fine.
Yep.
And you can actually really tell how much like your brain is operating in a different way whenever it's under this, like, oh, I have to win, versus this, oh, I'm just in here to have fun. And
Yes.
you will see different things. And I wouldn't say I will necessarily perform better. And obviously, when you're in a competition, if you're in a tournament, that's different. You're not going to be necessarily trying new things. You're probably going to do your best moves that you've drilled 1,000 times. But
Yep.
in the day to day, I notice that whenever I'm just going in and, maybe you'll do like 70 to 80% and just trying to not even trying to be more creative, but you are just naturally more creative when you don't put so much pressure on yourself, and you are able to access more of that flow state to where
Yep.
it's just like it. And it's cool when you get, because when you're first learning a new skill, there's no flow because there's no muscle memory that you can just like turn off your brain and tap into. But with any skill, but I'm just kind of getting to that point with jujitsu
Yeah.
where I can just go in and not, obviously you're not like totally taking it easy and not thinking, but you're also just not like totally going crazy and giving it everything. And you're able to find this like happy medium and flow state where you're like doing really well and using half of the effort.
Yeah.
You're trying half as hard, but you're not getting half the results. And I think once again that is totally true of life, because you can't, if you're just going in like, yeah, of course there's days where you need to get up and it's like, okay, today I'm getting after it. I need to do whatever X thing, and that's that. And there are days like that, but really, for me, I want to have like a super long-term time horizon, like that whatever I'm doing, like think of it as 10 plus years. The podcast, for example, like this is a 10 plus year journey. So I don't need to come in here and make a Hollywood film, I don't need to get in there and try to be like tapping the black belts every day. The
Yep.
most important thing is just to show up, to get in there and get the
Mm.
practice in. Same thing here. The most important thing is just to like, okay, let's get someone on, let's have some conversations, let's maintain, the connection, like keep getting content out. That is the most important thing. And I think if there's anything people think of whenever they're going to start something, they're intimidated because especially nowadays, it's like,
Yeah.
what are you blasted with? You're blasted with information of like the top 1%. You're like, oh, I want to start surfing. All you can think of is guys surfing like 50-foot waves and they're just like carving it up. You're like, fuck, I'll never be there. Or,
Yes.
you think of like, oh, I'm going to start podcasting, and you see guys, it's like the perfect setup, lighting, mic, the audio is perfect. And that, I think people get intimidated by that. But for me, at least, like we all have to start somewhere.
Yes.
Everyone, when they started, they sucked. Like
Yes.
that's the thing they don't show in those videos. It's like this is a 1 minute clip, and they don't show you the thousands of hours of them sucking before.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're speaking to, I think, the value of the experience and the value of being a student of life, or a student of anything that you put yourself into the experience of, and valuing that journey. And it sounds, I mean, the cliche, right, is like value the journey,
But
not
it's
the
true.
destination. But that there is so much truth to that, because it removes expectation, and it removes the pressure that there is some end goal or outcome that you are supposed to get to. We are skipping a million steps before we get to that, right? And I think then that's where fear comes in. And fear is the strongest emotion we have, right? It boils down to fear or love in most situations, right? But if we are approaching it from a space of fear, it is going to be very, very hard to find that courage to start, knowing you have 10 more years of work to try to get to that outcome, and people don't even try, right? What a disservice to self-discovery, right? When you don't try to put yourself out there or just find that next step. And you might go into it and be like, I hate this. This sucks. Right. Or like, I suck at it. Right. And like, that's okay. But I think another very valuable part to us being human is like, sometimes it's about learning what you're good at and what you want to do, but it's also extremely valuable to learn what you hate and what you don't want to do. Right. But you can approach either content with the same student of life mentality. And I love the fact that then there's hidden things in that are still valuable. It makes for, it's one of those, it's almost like a pet peeve at this point, is like when people say that it was a waste of my time, in a sense. because I think there's always something you can get out of something, even a terrible experience, you know, and that's not to say to invalidate, for instance, like traumatic experiences, right? Like I don't love when people will say, and I've have to work on, I've been working on this in sessions, right? Where with people who've been through horrible, horrible things, is like, you don't want to invalidate that by saying like, well, what did you learn from it? Right. Or like, what can we make meaning out of
What do
this?
we take away from this?
Yeah, yeah. And you want to be like nothing. Like there was nothing fruitful about your trauma, right? But can we make something because of this experience mean something to you now so that you are able to move forward with your life and still find it to be fulfilling in some sort of way, right? But in lesser severe sort of situations and cases, I do think it's a disservice to us to kind of have that waste of time mentality, because it is totally outcome focused. You know, you either make it to that end goal or you don't, and there's a wave of the mountain, right, as you put it, that you are completely missing along the ride, and you might actually get to the end and be like, holy shit, I want to be on the other mountain. Like, didn't even realize I've been actually following the wrong path this entire time, and now I don't, this isn't the view I was looking for in the first place, you know. Isn't that really a waste of time at the end of the day?
Yeah. And I mean, even if the lesson you take away from it is, oh, I should probably not be so focused on climbing mountains that I don't take a fucking second. And honestly, that's like really that's from my own failure of getting
Yes.
to the top of these mountains. Like that would be a good example of my time in the military, like getting through special operations training, like becoming like, oh, like I'm going to get to this and be a badass. And then I got there, it's like, oh, these are just like normal guys. And that's not an indictment. It's just saying like, of course they're just normal guys. And that was my own issue with expectation management and the
Yeah.
whole climbing the mountain. I was so focused on the mountain. And so that's my own lesson that I'm saying like, hey, don't forget, maybe look around. If you don't, that's fine.
Yep.
You'll get there. I mean, I think the shittiest thing would be to spend your whole life climbing a mountain that you'll never reach. And then at the end of it, realizing not only did you not even get to the mountain, but you didn't want to be climbing that mountain anyway. So that would be a really shit. But I think like Jim Carrey, after he got into like his more spiritual yogi phase.
Frame of mind. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I think he was one of his sayings, I'm paraphrasing, but it goes something along the lines of like, I wish everyone could have everything that they ever wanted so that they could realize that it's not maybe not enough, but it's not going to fulfill you, you know, like all the external things. And on the one hand, obviously that's easy to say of like, it's not going to fulfill you, you know, sitting in your mansion or like on your yacht of like, oh, that looks pretty nice, even if it's not fulfilling.
Yeah.
But honestly, even for me, not that I'm, you know, at that level, but even having achieved the things that I have thus far in my life has been, it's given me that same lesson. Like there's nothing that is, I'm going to reach the point of, at which point I will be like, okay, I'm good, you know, boom, I'm fucking set, you know?
Yep.
And
Yep.
if anything, that lesson helps me, it helps to allow me to, it enables me to live more in the present.
Yes.
Because you know, one day in 10 years, I will have my black belt. And then obviously you still get better. And they say like the black belt is just the beginning. But like, how fun is it that I get to participate in this tradition of like, boom, you know, I'm here, I'm in my blue belt, I'm grinding, you know, trying to get the purple belt. And like, only once you have had that experience of working so hard and being miserable during the journey and getting somewhere, and then I call it like achievement induced depression. And then you're like, fuck, I got this. And then you're like, fuck, you know, like, so what, you know? And I didn't
Yes.
even enjoy the journey. And so now I'm not, I wouldn't say trying. It's more of like, oh, I learned the lesson of like, hey, you know, stop and smell the roses and really
Yes.
enjoy this journey because
Yes.
we only get to do it once.
Yes. That's, I could not say that any better. It's a zest for life itself in that way, I think, you know, and that's something that I wish, Levi, you brought up such a cool point, because I think that's something that I wish we were to ask ourselves, not have other people ask us, although that can sometimes be helpful if it's coming from an objective point of curiosity, right? But we often are raised, right, as small sponges of the world, learning from all the people in front of us, right, trying to teach us how to approach life. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in some curated idea of what we think our life is supposed to be about in some way, shape, or form, that we lose sight of even asking ourselves that question. What do I want my life to literally be about? Right. And we get on that track, right? That we think it's like, well, okay, we've kind of been conditioned to think like, well, I do need a pretty good job, or like money, or I've been raised in a really maybe wealthy family. And so like success is like what I have to go do, right? But when do we take a moment to literally ask ourselves that question? What do I actually value, regardless of anybody else's opinions, right? And if I have one freaking shot at this, which may be true, right? There might be one freaking life that you end up giving, and it can be taken in a second, right? Which is a mind-boggling concept in and of itself. If that's all I have right now, how do I want to spend it, and how do I want to make it mean something to me in that way? And I wish it's a part of my mission to make sure people are asking that question to themselves, because I think we are going to live in a different kind of life if that could be possible.
Yep, I agree. And I think even it's kind of like, for me, sometimes it's interesting to see people that like they have it all, or, you know, they have a lot of things, but I can see in their eyes that it's like, but that is only meaningful if that's meaningful to you.
Yes.
So like if your definition of success is XYZ and you get XYZ, then that's awesome. Good for you. And you know, God bless. But if your definition of success is ABC and you went for XYZ just because society says that money and girls and party and, you know, whatever society, or maybe it's wealth and education, and you went to an Ivy League school, or, you know, it could be anything, whatever, probably like the little culture that you're raised in, whatever it emphasizes, like just because you chase that and got it, that doesn't mean anything. And if anything, I feel bad for the people that are like, cool, well, you might have money, but like if you sacrificed friendship and family and children and love and health to get there,
Yep.
well, you know, is that really success? That's not my definition of success. So,
Right.
and it may or may not be yours, you know, to whoever that is. But, you know, I think you know, when you see that person who they're like, you know, they're like flashing these things, or maybe they're living this lifestyle. And I mean, I'm sure to some people they love it and that's authentic and that's
Yeah.
fine. But I feel like a lot of people um, are not really living their authentic self and their authentic version of success.
Agreed. Agreed. And it's about getting, I think, really, really clear about a deeper version of that, right? You might be able to say like, well, I do want success, but I would be the first to question like, why? Why is that important to you?
Mhm.
Right. Well, because that's how I've always been raised, and it's really comfortable to me to live a lifestyle like that. Okay. Why? Right. And if you genuinely take that question over and over and over again until you boil it down, it is remarkable how many real deep answers can come out that do actually tap into a space of authenticity, whether it's like, because if I don't have those things, I'm not enough, right? Or like, because my family really is not going to accept me at that point, right? Well, then I would be the first one also to say like, so is that success for you, or is that success based on conditional love you've been receiving from other people,
Mhm.
right? And I think that is where it is abundantly important to start to ask the deeper questions to ourselves and get very curious about that on our own, right? And seeing the value in that curiosity with your relationship with yourself, that in my opinion then gets to go translate into your relationship with your existence, literally,
Wow.
right? To me, like that's where it's not even about happiness, right? Like we might say like, well, that's happiness versus fulfillment, right? Or like, to me it's about peace, right? Like what in life genuinely brings you and your day to day, and knowing that emotion is going to happen, right? Like we're going to get caught in the snow globe of life, right? We're going to feel in the surface of everything because we have to kind of keep up with some level of that reality that's happening. But I think there is this other, and again, this might feel fruffier, kind of going into a little bit more of an existential perspective, but I think there is this other reality that is happening for us, starting with the question of where do we come from, if we're not asking that and we're on a floating rock in the middle of space, right? That is just wild that we're not wondering a little bit more. We're in the surface. And I think that when we start looking at it from that framework, that's where we start to get those deeper answers. Looking at this from like, what do I want out of this experience with this one shot I got at life, you know? Which makes me curious for like you actually in this conversation is like, I'm just curious about your opinion on where do you think we came from in existence, right? What matters to you in sort of living out that like life of authenticity, or like what you value as the one shot you got at life?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking. I think, in my dabbling with psychedelics, you kind of sometimes can get glimpses into, these realms, you want to call it dimension, not to say like visuals per se, but
Sure.
it's more of like your thought processes and the connections that are made. Maybe if you want to think of it along the lines of like divergent versus convergent thinking, something
Yep.
along those lines.
Yep.
And the best answer that I could give is really like that to experience life. And maybe not where are we from, but like more of like why are we here? And it's
Sure.
like the why is it's just to experience it, like we're here because we are meant to be here and experience these things and go through this experience.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
that's not answering the question directly of where are we from, but um more along the lines of like why are we here, and for me that's the best answer that I've arrived at up yet, up to this far in my life, and it's to experience it's to experience.
I think that's beautiful. I really do. And to be honest with you, Levi, I think that's actually where the question of like, where do we come from, right? Like there is a reason that we don't know the answer to that.
Mhm.
I don't need to know the answer. I don't need to know the reason as to why we don't know that, but it leads you, I think, to a better question, which is why, or why are we here, right? As you put it, right? What do we want to make of this? And if you can go into this with like, I am here to experience, period, just to see where that takes me, right? What a great way to tap into that part of like, I'm here to take on as much as I can just absorb from this wild experience in the first place. And there's going to be fun, but there's also going to be heartbreak. And I'm going to experience every single feeling that there is to experience in our palette and our repertoire of what that means to be human. Maybe that's it, right? Maybe that is the point, you know?
Mm.
Um, it leads me, I have this like theory, and this might sound like absolutely bonkers, but
Good, let's
for
go
whatever
bonkers
reason,
theory. That's what we're about on this podcast. Let's
and
go.
well, and it brings me honestly to peace. Like that is what actually brings me more peace is like, then when you go in, and I will say, like, I have had to learn a lot about like ego in that sense, and like the removal, therefore, of, which is like, in my understanding is that part of me that wants to be comfortable, the part of me that wants to just live in familiarity, the part of me that wants to over identify and attach with everything I think I know about this life, right? And everything I think I'm right about, which is all of what we're talking about. And ironically, all of it could be wrong. And I accept that, right? That's the fun part about trying to like work outside of ego, right? Is like I could say all this and who freaking knows, right? So that's kind of beautiful. But it has made me sort of theorize then like maybe that's that question of like experiencing, right? I kind of think of it from the viewpoint of like, if the universe is infinite in a sense, right? Theoretically, then there are infinite representations of the universe, right? Whether that is in like living matter or even sometimes I think in like tangible matter that like humans create, right? But in a way that's still a representation of something that the universe like offers because its living organisms have produced it in one way or another. And that has brought me peace in then kind of thinking about, so therefore there is probably an infinite amount of variations of people, of plants, of animals, of whatever you want to say, right, that exist, meaning that if there is like there almost must be bad, right? There almost must be good, right? Like we're never, and we're never going to escape that race of like the good versus evil or good versus bad, right versus wrong sort of thing, which I think is part of our demise. Sometimes it's like, am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? The analytical part of our brain wants to try to figure out if we're right or wrong on things. But, and it's kind of like a Nietzsche, I guess, perspective, if you will, right? But I think it's beautiful because it makes room for every possibility of human to exist within this infinite time that we do get to have. And it makes me able to accept more of when people piss me off, right? Or like a version of a person that I don't get along with. There's still something about them that I'm like, well, if you are from the altruistic universe that is the same that I am from, I still can find love for you. Like there's still something you're serving here, even if I have no idea what that is, right? And maybe you don't serve me right now, right? Our little like data points of being versions of the universe maybe are not like matching or aligning in some way, but maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe it is with someone else that you do go serve. And I can accept that answer, which I think brings me a lot of peace to remove myself and my ego from like daily conflict and surface level problems that are happening for like most of us on a day-to-day basis. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but
It's great. Yeah, absolutely.
that's where my thought goes.
No, I feel you. Sometimes, I never even bring it back around to the original point I meant to have. That's okay.
I'm like, that's where my ADHD exists, and that's okay too.
No, it's great. I would say, so I wanted to make one point when you were talking about, like the necessity of good and evil. And I remember Jordan Peterson was talking about, I think you remember when Tiger Woods had an affair. This was probably like 10 years ago or whatever. And there were
Poor
people
guy.
people criticizing Tiger Woods. And Jordan Peterson was like, so to connect this back of like, he's saying like, you're criticizing Tiger Woods, but what would you do? And this was the analogy he made. It's like, you get to the 18th hole and there's a bus full of Swedish bikini models waiting for you. It's like, people want to pass judgment, but you're not even in that situation to be able to make that choice. It's like, oh, you're a fucking 300-pound fat dude, like living in like the middle of fucking nowhere, South Dakota. Is like, yeah, he cheated on his wife. It's like, well, you don't even have the capacity to make that choice. And to connect it to what we're saying, it's like, good, would it be good if there wasn't a choice to do otherwise? So
True that.
that's like, good is applaudable because there's temptation. It'd be like, no one applauds you for staying on Earth. We're all subject to gravity. There's no choice in the matter. If we could like fly off to other planets, maybe it's like, oh wow, you decided to stay. Thanks for staying. We appreciate it. But no one can do that. So it's no one is applauding you for that. But it's only when you have a temptation and you are able to have self-awareness and self-control and use your more than animal instinct, your human consciousness to override that, and achieve something greater. That's what is applaudable.
Absolutely.
That's the point I would make about, like the necessity of good and evil. It's like, at the end of the day, those are just words that we have invented to ascribe these concepts of right versus wrong. It's like, like if I'm gonna like killing someone, we can use any utterance, like if I say it in Spanish, it's a different word, but at the same time, it's like you did something that was wrong. And I mean, that's what to sin. Literally, I think it's an Assyrian word. It means to miss the mark. It's like an archery term. So like, if you want to think of it as like, people think like sin, oh, religious, It's like, okay, well, that's one way of thinking it. Or you can just think of it as like its literal translation of like, oh, you fucked up, you missed the mark, you sinned, whatever you want to call. Like, if you don't have a concept of that in your mental framework for dealing with life, then I don't know, like, how do you say like, oh, today was a good day? Why was it a good day? Things went well. How do you know? Like, today was a shit day? Why? Well, I fucked this up. Well, how do you know? Well, you missed the mark. You sinned. So it's like, you need a framework for what you're shooting for, which we can generally say is good, and then what you're not, or like very bad things where it's like bad, it's avoidable, you should not do it, evil, whatever term that you want to assign to it is fine. but if you're not using these frameworks to help you process life, then okay, you just have one less tool at your disposal to attempt to deal with, this literally limitless amount of information that we're receiving through our five senses plus the spiritual.
Yes, absolutely. I love how you said you can use human consciousness to override the animal instinct that exists in all of us, because I think that that's one of the most limiting beliefs from the get-go, is believing that you have no power, right? Believing that you have no choice in the matter of deciding what your mark is, right? Well, I don't really have a mark for whatever reason, or like, well, that's not my mark because like so and so and so on told me that that's not my mark, right? But I think, again, going back to like curiosity within yourself and asking yourself really important questions that help you guide what this journey is going to mean to you while you're here is also adding into that, like, where is your mark, right? And can you be open to the understanding that you as a human being, right? That's the baseline. You already have consciousness, right? And we like, I think sometimes we forget how much, and actually that brings me actually to something else that one of your other podcasts has kind of reminded me of, is like trusting your body, right? Our mind is simultaneously abundantly limited, and yet due to the carnal man, I think, in us, and some of like the limitations of like the default system that a brain runs on, as amazing as our brains are, but it's programmed for default, right? It wants to make an easy system. But consciousness is the exact dichotomy, right, of the limitations of the mind in an abundance of the mind that is built into your nature, to every single one of us, to override that other system, right? But we don't, we're not taught that, which irks me, not gonna lie. And maybe one day I'll make a podcast so I can maybe hopefully teach that at some point.
You
but
should.
Thank you. But I think that's really where it starts, is like embracing and trusting what it means to literally be given human life, one of the most miraculous forms of life that we can literally be provided in this experience. And it already comes with the tools and the consciousness to override all of these other systems. You have that choice, you have that power. Don't ever let the limiting part of your mind tell you otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, you look at like when a human egg is fertilized, and then you have like these millions, or however many, maybe it's billions or thousands, I don't know, but like all the sperm cells are coming, and then actually, from my understanding of it, once one enters, it like closes off to not allow any more to
Anymore.
in.
Makes sense.
And so that's what's crazy, is like you already won the lottery just to be born,
Yes.
just to have been born as a conscious human being. And so, like you said, miraculous, I think that's the perfect word for it. But I made a note before we started, and you had been talking about some observations you had made about a victim mindset, or the victim mentality. And I wanted to bring us at some point around to the podcast, because I think it's something that we're seeing a lot of in our society, especially these days. And I think you're going to have a really unique perspective on it, working as a therapist. So can you elaborate some on that, whether it's what you've learned or your observations?
Yep, absolutely. I'll do my best with this, and from my own understanding of what I kind of have observed here. I'll first say that, like, a victim mindset, if you will, right? How I kind of would define that is that it's someone who kind of thinks the world is, or believes, I would actually say even deeper, more than just has a thought about it, right? Thoughts are floating through, but a belief that that life somehow is working against you, right? That there is really nothing happening in your favor for you, and therefore you are experiencing more problem and conflict than pretty much everybody else, right? Which already is a very irrational way to think about it, right? We have to grasp, like, you're telling yourself the world is against you. This life, this entire experience is against you, and you ultimately hold more problems than everyone. that sounds almost silly when you say it out loud, right? But I do think we are in a society that is growing, right? And I do think it's important to ask that question of like, why is this becoming more and more of a problem? And in my observations, I think there's a couple different reasons like for that. And one I will say is like, I am never ever going to invalidate growing up or experiencing some form of trauma, right? For those of us, myself included, who have never been through a truly traumatic experience that involves violence, assault, sexual assault, any form of like uh, physical violence that would put your brain into a state of such fear that it makes you either no longer want to be here or participate in life, or so scared that your nervous system is now reacting on a overly high alerted system that creates you from it puts in a sense of debilitation, right, that doesn't allow you to go function, right? For those individuals, I genuinely have the most empathetic heart in that way, because that is an uphill battle in coming through that. And that's where I went into like, it's not okay that that happened to you. There's nothing meaningful about that experience. But what is it now that we can make with your life going forward, right? Outside of that experience, right? Knowing that that experience maybe is no longer happening anymore. It's a memory, right? And how do we learn to work outside of that memory, right? So that's where I also believe, even in the worst case of feeling like life is against you, there is still ways to move forward from that experience. But so I think trauma is one that creates sometimes a victimized sort of like thinking trap, if you will. I'm also, I think, more in like today's society is entitlement is a big one. We are, in living in the most convenient society we've ever seen before. And so when we believe that we're just somehow like deserving of convenience, right? That just doesn't click in my mind of how we can feel like we have a right to that. I don't, and it's tricky because like on one hand, right, you are given the miracle of life, right? Like how you said, it is a legitimate miracle that you are here and that you were given life, right? So there is something that does say you deserve this in some way. And I don't know if deserve is maybe the best word for that, but like you're here, right? You were given this, you were gifted life, right? But yet somehow along that process, you were taught that you should also be given everything else that's comfortable, desirable. And to me, it is when like you face that question of like, how much is your desire running your life, right? How much of your wants you believe you are entitled to? Everything you experience that feels problematic or that falls outside of that path of like what you're trying to obtain or that you want in life is going to feel like it's resisting you, right? And I think that's where we get into that, like over time, right? And how we repeat that if we're never breaking outside of like the attachment to our desires and recognizing that we can even become attached to our desires in the first place, we are going to become subject to a victimized mentality. But it can be a very toxic one in that way. There is not a person who benefits from a victimized mentality, right? Having people feel bad for you, people self-pitying you, or people pitying you. That is not a service to other people. That is not how you care for other people. And it's also not how you get care from other people. So I say this is such a toxic cycle because then you go out in the world and your brain is looking for more reasons why people don't like you or more problems are happening or like life is resisting you, but you aren't taking accountability for how much of your mindset and that victimized mentality is actually creating the havoc in your life. And it becomes a blind spot, I think, for a lot of people. But it's really hard to tell someone you got to take responsibility of some of these problems in your own life, I
Yeah,
hope that answered your question.
yeah, that's so good. No, it's great. I think you have a great insight on that. Um, Kind of on the flip side of that, then I was thinking like, okay, so obviously victim mindset, I think part of it in our society is that's being rewarded. So this is just like anything, it's a results-based process. Like
Yeah.
if a dog does something, you give it a treat. It's just an animal. It doesn't know like there's no computation or deeper thought about that. All it knows is, oh, do this more. And so I
Yes.
think at a most basic level is like this, that the victim mentality is being rewarded
Yes.
by our society. So I think that is an issue of why it's growing. But I think maybe on a more positive note, um, what can people do to cultivate the opposite of that? I just wrote down, I would maybe call it an abundance mindset. I don't know what you would call it, but
I
what
love that.
in your clinical experience thus far, what would you recommend to people to try to, or what are the things that people can do that can be helpful to cultivate an abundance mindset, or the opposite of a victim mindset, saying there is
Yep.
enough, and I am, you could say maybe I am entitled to that, but I have to work for it, you know?
Yes. Yes. Abundance mindset is awesome. I think that's a great term for it. I think there's genuinely a multitude of things that need to be kind of put into practice in order to do that. But what I will also preface that with is it is your mind is going to make it sound harder than what it actually is, right? Putting some of these things into practice, because it does go back to a lot of basics. Ironically, as complicated as this life and our existence sometimes is, it is also extremely simple sometimes when we just like, when we be intentional about simplifying it, right? So the first thing that I would ever recommend to anybody ever trying to overcome, whether it's a victimized mentality or like struggles in their life in any way, shape, and form, is practice pausing in any given moment and asking yourself, what am I thinking about right now? Like literally acknowledging that you have a streamline of ongoing thought happening, a radio frequency in the ether of thought that is happening all the time, and you are in control of tuning into what radio frequency you want to be listening to, right? That goes back to like how we were talking about the power of choice, right? But if you are so far ingrained in your brain, because there's a part of it that I do think falls outside of some of our control, which is like our neurology, right? When you practice something for so long, your brain is going to just keep doing that same thing over and over and over again, which is where the power of pausing, or how other people put it as meditation or mindfulness, right, is because you are intentionally stopping and looking in your present moment and going, I can break out of the autopiloted thought that is constantly happening that keeps me inside the snow globe all the time, right? A pause is to break you out of the snow globe. And when I say snow globe, I mean like it feels like all the problems of the world are all your day to day and all the things we have to, responsibilities and everything we have to do, your family, right? Everything that we feel like we're flooded by all the time. It's almost as if we're sitting inside of it and that's all we see sometimes, right? So pausing is the art of acknowledging that you can actually step outside of that and go, I am sitting in my office right now. Nothing has changed. Nothing is happening. Like literally there are problems out there, but they're also only coming to me through the vehicle of thought right now that I'm not paying any attention to. I'm just reacting to it. So if you can practice the art of pausing and getting into the habit of enhancing your awareness of the present moment, you are going to start breaking neurological cycles in your brain, which is also why people say meditation is so important. That is what you are doing. You're teaching your brain to focus so hard on one thing that you notice when drifting thought and distracting thought comes in, right? So that is the first thing that I would ever tell anybody, is to practice that. And even if you say you hate meditation, there are different variations of it that you can do that help you practice that. The second thing that I would then do is tap into gratitude. It is, and I would even start this one. So, and I know like there is so much resistance to this, but gratitude for your body. The fact that we are walking around with 206 bones and there is a cage naturally built to surround every vital organ that is pumping, moving, shifting. It's so intentional on a cellular level to I'm going to say that word again, miraculous degree, right? The fact that that is happening and you are waking up and you don't even give it one thought every day. And most of us don't even care to try to take care of those parts. That's wild, right? How do you ever start to care for yourself or anybody around you if we are not even looking at one moment of graciousness for that process, right? So I would say any form of gratitude, it doesn't have to just be for your body, but breaking down into small things, right? Let go of your expectations of big things that's what you need to be grateful for. Or expectation management, as you put it earlier. Be grateful for the fact that you can breathe okay today, right? How many, I love to use the example of like when you like break your pinky, right? Or like like you have a cough, that week, and how inconvenient it all of a sudden becomes, right? But that week after that you feel better or your pinky heals, right? You're like, holy shit, I can grab this doorknob again and it like doesn't hurt, right? That is the kind of simplicity that is in gratitude that gives you an abundance of opportunity to see love and the world working, life working for you in every second of every day, right? We get distracted, we lose sight, and our analytical brain is so focused on problems, right? And it makes sense. We want to solve it, right? Especially if we're in danger, we want to keep ourselves safe and we want to solve. That's like the carnal instinct, I think. But again, consciousness says there's so much more to that. So I think great gratitude is going to be the next one. And then the third thing I would say is like go back to your basics as a baseline. By that, I mean giving your body good food. Our society is pumped with processed shit that is literally meant to kill us.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah.
It's working. Population control, easy. Let's pump a bunch of shit in there, right? And that's not, I don't care what form of like diet you want to go by in that way, but like a balanced diet in that sense. Doesn't mean you can't have the McDonald's or the Pop-Tart every now and then, right? But like there are things that you have to there's that chocolate chip cookie Pop-Tart though, right? No, I'm teasing, but you can, right? You can make space for both of those things, but it is a balance in that sense. Getting some level of physical activity, right? Your body is kinetic. It is meant to move in some way, shape, or form. You don't have to go be a total pro at jujitsu in that way, excuse me. But you need to give the basics to the sole formulation of how you're going to go about functioning in your day to day. Water, sunshine, sitting out. I know you might hate the heat, right? But like 10 minutes of it, right? Your serotonin increases from that, right? You get on a better sleep wake cycle, right? Your circadian rhythm because you're interacting with the sun, right? So I think there's some importance in that. And I think when you begin by doing those very simple things, you naturally, and this is the part of your your consciousness override, to make a very long story somewhat end to this question, you are naturally going to be inspired to take better care because all of a sudden you intentionally care for it. So then I think we start to care about other things like, what can I do? What else am I good at? Right. And that natural curiosity to want to go self-discover starts to happen even more. Right. And I think that's where just that innate part of us is going to come through. Right. But you have to, I think, start with a lot of these like basic things for yourself.
Yeah, so good. Just to kind of recap for some of the viewers, like I wrote down awareness for the first one. I don't think you used that term. That's what I would call it, but you said mindfulness or the pause.
Awareness is perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Learn
actually,
how to
I
become
wanted
aware.
to say a little thing for maybe some people, at least for me, like I take it this specifically with patience. Patience is something I've had to work on for like a long time, still working on it. But I can tell I've definitely made strides with it, over time. One of those things, like a little bit each day and it gets better. But like I'll take it as like, oh, like the universe is challenging me right now. Literally, like I will have like that pause or almost like it's almost not an out of body experience, but like, oh shit, like, oh, this is the universe challenging me. Like this is a little opportunity to like not fall for it. I take it they're like it's trying to trip me up. Not in a bad way, but it's like this is an
No.
opportunity for me to like flex my patience muscle. And then like all you have to do is like you have that for a second, you're like, oh, this is bullshit. I don't care. Like
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
it's like just some random thing, But if you're someone like me, that's like very like obsessive compulsive, and that's not, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's part of my superpower.
Yep.
But there are also negative sides to that. And
Yes.
just a little tip for some people might help them. It's like, be on the lookout for those little challenges. You know, maybe it's with your spouse or your loved ones, or
Yep.
I mean, probably those are the people you spend the most amount of time with, and inevitably they're going to do things that rub you the wrong way or aggravate you. And how
Yep.
much of a better response to probably just say nothing, you know, and just take a breath and be like, okay, you know, they're doing it a way that I wouldn't. And I probably maybe prefer that they didn't, but does it really matter enough for me to even say anything?
Yeah.
So I would say to people like, be on the lookout for those little, the universal challenges. But I mean, I'm more the type of person, I don't believe in coincidence. So like, I look for meaning in everything, you know, like,
Yes.
oh, why did that happen? Or like, oh, that's an interesting coincidence. You know, like, oh, that's there for me. I would call it like, oh, that's like a wink from God, or oh, this is the universe challenging me, you know,
Yeah.
and and it feels good whenever you can just, you know, have patience, and then like in 5 minutes you're like, oh yeah, see, that was nothing, and I'm glad I didn't say anything.
Yes. Levi, what a great example. I want to give you an example because you'll appreciate it because it's about my mother, but that's a great example of awareness, right? You had the pause to go, I need to like zoom out for a minute because and now I'm telling myself in that pause, now I have the space to not use reactivity just based on carnal emotion, but now I'm actually using consciousness to say, what else could possibly be going on here than just my mom wanting to piss me off? Because that's probably not what's happening, right? It's just something that she's also probably doing. And this, I'll give this example, and I will also add to this that another piece in self-discovery is going back to those like curiosity questions about yourself, right? Why do I have the certain patterns that I have, right? Trying to observe patterns in your own life, but that starts with pausing. And so I'll give you this very quick example here of a few weeks ago I was up for Mother's Day with my mom, and my aunt is also at the house. My grandma's at the house. And something that I have observed in my awareness, both about myself, and then I try to look at where does that come from, right? And you mentioned like obsessive, you know, compulsive kind of parts of things. I have so many traits that are like that, and not just like that, but also like my mom, for instance. My mom is the person who, and hopefully if she watches this, it's going to be hilarious. But she's the person who needs to be busy, right? Like has a lot of energy, wants to be doing a million things at one time. And in her mind, like she is helping, right, with that. And so she's on the phone for like a couple hours with like a work problem that she's solving. She's decorating a cake simultaneously. And she started our dinner, which my aunt had set out, but my aunt was like, I don't know how to like cook the seafood. So like you guys go ahead and you know, you can do this whenever you want. Well, mom puts on like the shrimp, mom puts on the flounder, but like doesn't tell me that anything's cooking, doesn't tell anybody that she's cooking. Grandma's like, hey, you know, I'm kind of getting hungry. Are you gonna go cook the scallops? I'm on scallop duty. So I like I'm going, what are the sides? Like, what's happening? And all of a sudden the shrimp start boiling over. Well, Colleen does not see this at all, right? Like, is still on the phone, still decorating the cake. There's water going everywhere. My aunt's like, oh my God, like, look at this mess. It smells like fish in here, right? Like, everyone is like, it feels like chaos in this moment. And my aunt looks at me and she's like, aren't you going to tell her? Like she wants to yell at her, like, look at what you're doing, Colleen, right? And I literally just in that moment, honestly, became humorous to me at that point because I know my mom literally thinks that she's being helpful. And in that moment, that pause gave me a moment to go, this is not intentional. She's trying to be helpful. Yes, a mistake happened. It's a freaking mess right now. I know you want to yell at her based on probably a lot of your own sibling history, I'm sure, right? As most of us do. And yet I am going to grab a rag. And I looked at my aunt and I was like, just walk away. I'm going to clean it up. And literally like, boop, 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 cleaned it up, literally put the thing back on the stove. My mom turns around like 5 minutes later and she's like, oh, good. The shrimp are done.
She's like, you
Yeah.
nailed it.
Thanks, mom. We're good. Right.
Yeah.
And so like, it's those moments, you know, where your awareness, your curiosity, right, comes into play, and it breaks you of these old defaulted patterns that just react in moments like that. And so your story of patience very much is a great example of that. The universe might be testing me right now. How do I see this as an opportunity to overcome the lesson that it's going to teach me until I get it?
Mhm. Yes,
So
exactly. So
great
well
example.
put. And even kind of another little thing, this one on resentment. I don't know that I would say I'm specifically a specifically resentful person. I don't know how much my resentment levels would compare to others. It's not really the most quantifiable thing that they, you know, put on, studies and whatever. But I have noticed that in myself, less so recently, but before, and still sometimes these days, where you just have those thoughts where, someone did something to you like years ago, and then you're here like getting pissed off about it, like those motherfuckers. Um, I think we all have those to some degree. And
Yeah.
really, like my thought process is like, okay, so I have 24 hours in a day, 8 sleeping, so I really only have 16 hours. That's not a ton of time. And do I really want to be putting my mental energy towards stuff that's just not good? It's not good. Like, it's not good energy. It's not good to think about or dwell on. I mean, it's one thing if there's a memory you have and you're constantly presented with it, there's
Yeah.
possibility that there's a lesson that your brain is presenting to you and you haven't extracted that. That's a Jordan Peterson concept. Like,
It's
maybe you
true.
haven't extracted that lesson yet, and that's why you're being presented with it.
Yep.
But like, and that's a good question to ask if you're being presented. But then there's other ones where it's just like, oh, like someone made fun of me that one time, that fucking bitch.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you just got to be like, okay, just let it go. And for me,
It's a memory. Yes.
my thought process is like, okay, I only have so much time in the day. I want to be focused on the positive. Like, what are my goals? There's so many things I could be visualizing, jujitsu moves. I could be thinking of business ideas. I could be contacting someone. I could just be telling one of my loved ones, like, hey, I love you. You're great. There's so many good things, so many good options. I don't want to be thinking and dwelling on that, but it's so easy to do. So easy.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know if I'm specifically, I think in my patience, I know that's a thing, which is great to know. You got to know yourself.
Yep.
But in the resentment, it's just something like, I don't want to manifest or channel or dwell on or give even mental space in my brain for that.
Yes.
So like, and that's all it is just saying like, no, I won't, I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm not going to, and that's
Yes.
that awareness, being intentional and be like, no, I'm going to think about good things. And
Yeah.
literally, like, sometimes when I do that, or like I'm having bad thoughts, I'll literally be like, you know what, God bless them. Who knows what they're going through or their issues and whatever. And like, just tell myself, like, just let it go, just gotta talk through it. And that's that.
That's exactly
So
right, Levi. Have you heard of I might say his name wrong. I think it's Joe Dispenza talking about like our natural addiction and the ego's addiction to hatred.
I know Joe Dispenza. His book, The Placebo Effect, really fucking good. But I'm not familiar with this concept.
He kind of goes into some thoughts on, how like our ego is innately wired to hold on to hatred. And not just like hate, but all the other formations of hate that show resentment, bitterness, annoyance, right? Whatever we want to form in the sense of like negative emotion that keeps us in a state of either fear or anger or sadness, right? And there is an addictive part of our being, right, that somehow in my opinion, it comes from a place of like feeling as if we remember those things, we're somehow going to be more like protected in a way, like, but at the same time, it's not that, it's an illusion. That's an illusion of protection, right? But how you just said that reminded me of that exact concept, is like, when you can accept that wrong things have happened to you, right? And like, maybe the lesson sometimes is acceptance in that way. The lesson is letting go, right? The lesson is, in every single moment of every day, we have a choice to either accept what's happening or resist what's happening, right? And there's only one of those that allows us to move forward, right? So I think I just share that with you because that may be something kind of out of your curiosity you may enjoy to kind of take a look at. But something to kind of consider is, there is some underlying processing that does create an addiction to that feeling and wanting to stay into that and bringing up more of those memories. It somehow makes us feel like we have more power and control if we keep it on the forefront of our mind, and yet it is controlling us. Right? None
Mhm.
of those things let us be free for our own goals, our own choices in life. And when we can also honor that, make peace with the fact that I don't want to be addicted to hatred, right? Like what is the direction of love that I want to walk into, or goodness that I want to walk into? What a capability to free yourself at that point.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I think like I think you can leverage that if you're able to transform it. It's just like anything, like raw energy is an explosion and that's just destructive. But if you can channel it, like hydraulics is channeled energy. And so like for me, that's how I think of it. Just this like raw, just kind of, oh, I'm pissed off and I'm the victim, da 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 da. Like that's not anything. But like I'm kind of an angry person, but that I like channel that like fuck the haters. I'm gonna be successful and I'm gonna work hard and work my ass off and learn and I'm gonna be a success because fuck the haters and
Yeah.
fuck all the people like for example, like people, being American, they're like, oh, Americans don't speak languages or, this and that. I'm like, no, fuck you. Actually, I do. And I'm going to learn it so well that I'm going to be like the best Spanish speaker, whatever. And like, that's, if you want to like use it, you need to
Yeah.
channel that anger or whatever it is. Like, I think those are human emotions you should feel. And like, the thing is like I want to feel anger, but I don't want to be ruled by it. There's times where I will
Yeah.
act on my anger, but I'm not acting on it irrationally. I'm not like an animal that's just spastically reacting. It's like, you know what, this pisses me off. And this time I'm going to say something about it. But
Yes.
it's being conscious of like, this is how I feel. How am I going to react? The reaction isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm a yogi, stoic, nothing ever bothers me. And I'm
Yep.
not going to say, like, you know what, right now, this is bullshit. And I'm going to say something about it. But
Yes.
I'm consciously making that decision,
Yes.
consciously
Yeah.
thinking, like, okay, this is how I feel. Is this appropriate, in this case? Okay. Or like, and that's just about channeling it. Same thing, like, fuck the haters. Like, no, thank you to the haters because you're my motivation. Like, oh yeah, I'm not going to amount to anything. Okay, cool. Well, actually, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I don't need to say anything. I don't need to
Mm-mm.
say anything to prove you wrong. It's just like
Yeah.
with speaking Spanish. Like, okay, yeah, sure. I don't need to say anything. Like, once you hear me like demonstrating, like, oh shit, no, he can actually do this. Like, if you're good at jujitsu, it doesn't matter what color belt you're is. You don't need to say that you're good. Just go in and show the people, and they'll
So
know, like, okay, yeah, this guy's for real.
that's right. When you have to do it just to say it at the proving point, you're still giving away that power, right? That power is still not for
If you have to
you.
say it, you've already lost. That's
Yeah.
like so much of what's happening in our world. It's like, oh, I'm this, I'm that. We deserve this and that. I'm like, if you have to say it's like chances are, if you're saying it, it's probably not true. Like
Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
whatever the on scene and on spoken is the most accurate reality. The truest reality that we live
Mm,
in is the unseen and the unspoken. If you can see
mm,
it and touch it, it's way less real than the things that can't be, that are intangible. Like love. That's the love and fear. I love that. That's what you said before. Love and fear. That's like what things are basing out of. All this is just a reflection of that. Like
yes.
go to a society that is fear based, or a society that's not under control. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a war zone. Go to a country or a place that is full of love. You're going to see the symptoms of that. But at the end of the
Yes.
day, this physical dimension is just an expression of these
I
underlying
I could not
realities.
say that better myself. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a reflection of your internal world in every way possible. And if we can't grasp the understanding that this is an inside out kind of approach into taking back your life, and you really believe that it's somehow the outside is going to impact the inside, changing the outside is going to impact the inside, we're we're going to keep getting faced with the same problem over and over again by the
Yeah,
by the
it's the band-aids, fixing
yeah.
symptoms, but like there's underlying issues, there's soul work that needs to be done. And if you're like, oh, I have insomnia or I'm getting acne, or obviously there's sometimes physical things causing that, but like a
Yep.
lot of times it's like, okay, well, there's some issue at hand and your body is just expressing that in some way.
Yep.
And you're the one that needs to get in contact and say like, oh, maybe I'm not living my authentic self, or it could be any number of things. But All
Yes.
right, Haley. Well, I think we're coming up on like an hour and 20. I mean, I would go for, for however long, and we can definitely do it again. But yeah, I don't want to take up all your time and
Nope. That's okay. This has been a joy, truly. And I would anything you need in terms of if you want to do this again, I'm happy to talk. We could literally talk for hours, I think, on these kind of things. So that's super cool. But I think the last thing that I will end with is the most impactful is love is the greatest force on earth. And I don't mean that in a cheesy way. I mean that as energy. You described anger a few moments ago as energy. It is. Every emotion is energy, and every emotion has a usefulness to it if you channel it in some kind of way. And if we have the greatest energetic force ever, like love, that lives so deeply, innately in us, right? Imagine what we can do with that when we actually channel love into every fiber, every facet of our being and who we interact with in our day to day, the way we approach life, and I think that really is the bulk of when you can tap into that, life starts to happen for you.
Wow. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Haley, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, that's episode 8 with Haley Thomas. What a G, you're the best, and we'll definitely be having you on at some point.
Thank you.